else. So what we want to do, now that we have so much collaboration necessary and there's so much possibility for distraction and interruption because of this complexity and the size of organizations now, and the fact that we're all distributed so much, we have to be working with folks in different time zones, and all this is, we need structures and flow that enable a personal sense of flow, a personal sense of contribution without waste and delay and friction. So what we're going to get out of that is this sense of joy. And that's extremely important these days because we have this great resignation happening where everyone is starting to realize, well, I don't really like my job all that much. And there's opportunities for me elsewhere. I can work anywhere in the world. I can easily work remotely. It turns out that companies don't need everybody in the office all the time. So companies are really in a tough spot if they've been saddling their employees with friction and waste and delay and not providing them with a sense of belonging and progress and being a part of something that really matters. So value streams, I think, are extremely important, and flow is extremely important because all of a sudden we're able to understand work in the context of the flow of value to customers. It means everyone's contribution matters. Everyone's contribution is ultimately being delivered to a customer. And I'll talk more about those customers and that contribution and how that flow works. But this is just kind of some of the theory behind this work that I've been doing, and where I see a lot of the value is that we want to move towards these states of collective flow and individual flow, not only for our sakes, not only for our organization's sakes, but our customers. That's how our customers get what they want as quickly as possible and as consistently and sustainably as possible. So that brings me to, what is a value stream? And this just brought to mind that you folks can interrupt me at any time because we got a lot of time, and I figure if we wait until the end to ask questions, then people might forget things or they might just get tired of waiting. So if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand. If you're not sure how to do that, there's a reactions button in Zoom, and you can raise your hand. But if you also just want to sort of turn your camera on and raise your hand that way, I should be able to see it. Maybe there's a lot of folks in here, so I'm not sure that I'll be able to see it, but I'll definitely see if you raise your hand, you actually pop up to the top of the list. But also, if you have a question, you just toss a question mark in the chat as well, and I'll pause. So I'll keep an eye on the chat, and I'll keep an eye on the participant list, and hopefully I catch any questions. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to toss your hand up or toss a question in the chat. I'll be on the lookout for it. And I really don't mind. I think there's a lot in here that I can't cover. So questions are always really valuable because they identify some of the gaps that I can't fit into a deck. And you probably wouldn't want to sit around for every single detail. But so let's get into the core of this. What is a value stream? A value stream is really all of the activities that go into delivering value to a customer. And we think of it as a stream because it really flows from one activity to the next, right? One thing is finished and the next thing begins. Sometimes things happen in parallel. And sometimes we have breaks in the stream because something will be not correct and it has to go back. But essentially what we're hoping for is a continuous flow of work that results in value to a customer. So value doesn't actually flow anywhere. Value, you only know if you have value once a customer tells you that they got it, right? You only have value when you have some kind of feedback that says that what you delivered was valuable. But we do have a flow of work, and we do want to understand our work in the context of value. So connecting it to customers is really, really important. The next thing that I'll talk about, and so this is a representation of a couple of phases, not necessarily distinct activities. You can have any number of activities in a value stream. Obviously, you don't want hundreds. You don't want a gigantic value stream that's very complex. But you rarely will have a value stream that's this simple. This is just an illustration of the progression of activities. An easy way of identifying value streams and trying to think of your organization in terms of value streams is trying to understand where your customers are and working backwards. So wherever there's a customer, there's a value stream. There's a way that that customer receives value, or else there wouldn't be a customer of yours. So you can work backwards from a customer to try and understand where the value stream is and what the value stream looks like. But an important thing to note is that it's not just external customers that are customers in a value stream ecosystem. You also have internal value streams. So you'll have, and I'll explain what these look like and some examples. But you also have internal customers just like you have external customers. And there are folks inside the organization who derive value from value streams because they have things that they need. They have responsibilities. They have things that they expect. They rely on different aspects of the organization for value that allows them and enables them to produce their own value for customers. And you can have multiple internal value streams that serve a single external value stream or many external value streams. But there's always a customer. And that's the one thing that differentiates a value stream from a process. A process doesn't necessarily have a customer. A process could be entirely automated and just serve to produce an outcome or an output. But a value stream is really in the context of value, and that affects how we look at it and what we consider when we're trying to understand a value stream. And I'll get into that as well. So working backwards from a customer outcome is an easy way of identifying a value stream. And there's an excellent book that I highly recommend called The Great Transition from 1995 by a man by the name of James Martin. And I don't think I have this book available to show you, but it is here. He identifies 17 core value streams, and they're kind of useful as a reference. Things like legal review or hiring new staff can be sort of internal value streams with internal customers. And then of course, you'll have like shipping and receiving and things like this. A lot of your typical activities can be thought of in terms of a value stream because they have a customer outcome and there's a distinct flow of activities. So wherever you have a customer, you have a value stream, but the beginning of that value stream could be any number of activities as well. It could come from an idea that somebody has. It could be something that's distinctly requested by a customer can start a value stream. It could even be an incident that happens, right? If there's a fire in a warehouse, that could trigger a value stream where the resolution of that process is a customer getting value. Probably not fighting that fire. I mean, you could really think about resolving that specific issue as a value stream, although it's probably not a repeated and standardized activity to the extent of like manufacturing a product, but certainly like the process or flow of the insurance that factors in once there's an incident is a very distinct value stream. To kind of illustrate this in a much more productive way, I think about core and supporting value streams. So you'll have a core stream, which is something that you have an external customer purchasing the outcome from. So whatever comes out of that core stream is really what keeps your business afloat and is the reason why you're in business. And then you have supporting streams, which can be things like your security auditing process, or um, the process that develops your design systems. There's any number of things. Hiring is a classic value stream. Onboarding new employees, onboarding new customers is also a distinct value stream that you can measure and visualize. And this helps because it helps you understand these processes, which are typically really difficult to understand unless you work in them constantly. And if you work in a value stream, it's very difficult to understand because you understand your piece of the value stream, not necessarily the entire end-to-end flow. And it's important to understand the entire end-to-end flow because that's how you find the biggest opportunities to improve. And I'll get into how that's done. So when we think about mapping a value stream, the first thing to consider after you've identified a value stream to map is who should be a part of mapping, right? Who's going to do the mapping and who needs to be involved? So you definitely want a facilitator. And this doesn't have to be me or somebody that you hire to do value stream mapping, although value stream mapping is not a simple exercise. Sorry, I could say that it's simple, but it's not easy, and it does help to have a lot of experience. But if you have someone with facilitation experience, if you have somebody on your team who is very comfortable running workshops, they might be really good at facilitating value stream mapping. So you probably have somebody in your organization right now who would be good at facilitating value stream mapping, as long as they familiarize themselves with the process and they know how to run the steps of that flow. But then you want an, I say executor here. What I really mean is like someone who can make decisions, somebody who can say that we're going to do this, first of all, and make time for it and get all the people involved together. But also you want somebody involved who can say, we are going to change what we're doing based on the results of this exercise. Because if you map a value stream and you don't have anybody who can actually allow for change or enable the change or authorize a change to the process, then you've really just pointed out a problem with no possibility of a solution. Right? That's kind of a bummer. So you want someone who can actually say, we're going to do things differently based on what we've discovered in the value stream map. And you have my support to do that. So that's really important. I just noticed that the question in the chat about the name of the book is The Great Transition. By James Martin. It's an excellent book, and it's really about, it's a big picture book about how organizations run and how they should run, and I do recommend it to everybody. But so back to who's involved in the value stream mapping is you want representation from across the value stream, and I mean across the value stream meaning representation from each distinct area of activity. So you might have someone who understands planning because they work in the planning function. Maybe they're a product owner. Somebody who works in the design stages of the value stream, development, QA, security. Sometimes you'll have someone, if let's say you're going into a mapping exercise and everyone's been complaining about the legal review process, you probably should have somebody from legal in the mapping process. so that you get their perspective. You're going to want information from them. You're going to want to understand, why does it take so long to do this? You're not going to ask them that question directly, but you are going to find out by including them in the mapping process. So it's important to have folks who are involved in the value stream, involved in the mapping practice. And that doesn't mean you need everybody, but you need representation. So what I'll usually look for is someone who's not too junior, not too senior, right? If you have someone who's been doing the job for so long that they're actually used to how things go, and they don't really understand where the friction is because they're so used to it, or they have a simplified version of what's happening. Thanks, David. That's great. They have a simplified version in their head because they remember how things used to run like 18 years ago, and their understanding hasn't been updated since. That's not very valuable. Also, you don't want someone who just joined 3 days ago because they don't understand the process. They don't even know what they're doing yet, likely. But sometimes if you have space to include more people, it's great. You don't really want more than 12 people in a value stream mapping exercise because it's just too many voices, too many participants, and it can be difficult to manage. Something between 5 and 8 people is fantastic. It runs very smoothly. People get a chance to speak. You don't have people interrupting or worried about interrupting others. So 5 to 8 people representing various stages of the value stream is really ideal. I'm going to pause for a second just in case anybody has questions. All right. So let's say we wrangle all these people together, we get them onto a meeting. I've been doing a lot of these remotely, as you might expect, for the past couple of years, and I actually really enjoy it. It's not as engaging, but it's very productive. There's some really great tools that you can use to map value streams. I use Mural, which is an online whiteboarding tool. It's very simple. You can use anything that other people can see and other people can contribute to. So as long as they can contribute in real time, the tool will be fine for value stream mapping. And you really don't need anything complicated. I just use Post-it notes, basically. So you get these folks together. I try to aim for 2 to 3 hours, but I tend to move very quickly because I don't like taking a lot of people's time, and I know that their attention is very scarce and valuable. So I try to take as little time as possible, but getting a value stream map in under 2 hours is extremely challenging. I don't know if I've ever done it before. 2 to 3 hours is pretty good, is pretty great. But the first thing that we do when we map a value stream is working backwards from the customer outcome. We'll identify each of those distinct activities that contribute to delivering value, right? So we lay out all the steps. And this is literally just, okay, what's the start of the process? Then what happens next? Then what happens next? Then what happens after that? And the way that you can make sure that you've got it right is to work forwards and backwards, or backwards and forwards, but I like working forwards and backwards. So you'll start from the beginning, go to the end, and then you go backwards from the customer and say, okay, what happens before this? What makes this happen, right? This customer outcome, how is it delivered? And you could say, well, okay, we turn it on in production. And then you would work backwards from that. How does it get turned on in production? Well, it has to be delivered to the server. It's got to be downloaded to the server. So that's very granular. You probably don't want to get to that level of granularity, but another thing to mention is that you can actually be as detailed as you like, right? You don't want 100 steps in the value stream. You don't want 5. This 6 items is very simplified. It's probably too much, but it's just for illustration purposes. I think a sweet spot is somewhere between 12 and 20 distinct activities. If there's more than 20 distinct activities, then you're probably either too low down in the weeds, or your value stream is too complicated, and you might want to look at trimming it down somehow. But between 12 and 20 activities, you can lay it out fairly well. Hey, Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that I look at is sometimes if you have too many people involved, the big question that I have is, do they really need to be involved with that? One of the things that I get involved with in terms of an lean agile transformation is basically mapping value streams and developing a composite. What is the operational side of this value stream? What are the steps in there? And what are the interfaces to data systems that they utilize? And are they done properly? Just to go ahead and give you an example. One bank I was looking at, while I was looking at the value stream, I discovered that the data team in IT was delivering raw data, and the operations side was taking this data and putting it in spreadsheets to go ahead and calculate the outcome. And so in that particular case, one of the things I looked at is, okay, we need to go ahead and deliver more than just real data. What we need to know is what information they need and automate that process. One of the things that we're looking at, and the reason why a composite value stream involving data systems and operations has gotten more important, especially with digital transformation.
Yeah, that actually gets to a point that I'm going to touch on a little bit later, is that you can
Sorry,
really
I didn't mean to rush it.
No, you didn't rush it at all. It's a great point that you can really overcomplicate a value stream. And my approach is actually extremely simple compared to a lot of people who will map value streams, and I try to layer on complexity rather than describe it or visualize it by default, because I think that often we don't need a high level of detail to get value from a value stream map, but you can add detail and data wherever it's valuable, wherever you see an appropriate need. So if you're working with a team that's doing, let's say, a data modeling, or let's say data migration, or transformation, then representing the data would be pretty valuable, right? Understanding what's happening to the data throughout this process can be really interesting and valuable context.
Yeah.
Once you've got all the activities laid out here, what you can then do is understand how long each of these activities take. So and we call this cycle time. So the cycle time is the time that it takes for each individual activity to be performed, which is interesting on its own, but it gets really interesting when you start to calculate the delay time. So you add in the time that it takes between the activities, and this is usually where a lot of the value is. Value in mapping, not value in the value stream. There's actually no value in delays, which is why it's so important to measure it. So once we measure all of the delays in between the activities, it gives us an idea of where the most time is being spent and how that time is being spent. And we don't know in detail yet, but we do have a good idea of where we can focus and perhaps where we can dig deeper. And this is where the additional data comes in valuable, because if I have a value stream of 20 stages and there's a hotspot in only 3 of those stages and the rest of it looks fine, I don't need to go digging for tons of information on the rest of the value stream unless I'm looking for something else. If I'm not if I'm looking for, let's say, quality issues, then I would go and I would measure quality across the value stream. And I would try to find out where's the hotspot from a quality perspective. You could also look at value added time, for instance. So how much time is spent actually delivering something that the customer would pay for, that the customer would be happy to pay for. And that's usually a subset, a small subset of the cycle time, right? Because what's involved in the cycle time is, getting your task set up, understanding what you need to do, maybe spinning up a testing environment. Maybe it's conversations with other folks because the instructions weren't clear. All that is not time that your customer is happy to pay for. They want to pay for the time that you spend building the thing that they want. So we can measure the difference between all the time that's being taken and the time that's actually spent on delivering value. And that can be very revealing, and that can reveal a different hotspot. But it really depends on what the focus of the exercise is. And that's one thing I didn't mention yet, but I really should mention, is that before you embark on a value stream mapping exercise, it's really important to understand, what do you expect to get out of this? What's the goal? The goal is to go faster, to improve quality. It could be to improve employee experience. Let's say you have tons of people leaving, or you're afraid that you're going to lose a lot of staff. You can measure the employee experience across the value stream and what it's like to be working inside of that value stream. And that's going to inform what you measure, right? That can be challenging to measure, but you can absolutely measure it. And you can measure a lot of things inside of a value stream. And I'll get into a little bit of what you can measure on top of this basic backbone of steps and timing. But just for simple illustration purposes, and to sort of highlight what we get out of this process, you'll see that I've emboldened some of this text here, where we're taking a little bit more time than other areas of the value stream. Some of these things take a lot of time, but they're not highlighted, like development, because time that you spend on development isn't necessarily time wasted. It could be, but I wouldn't necessarily highlight it as a hotspot just because it takes a significant amount of time. But planning, for instance, planning is something that your customers usually don't want to pay for. They just want you to know what to do and do it, right? So time spent doing, they'll give a thumbs up to. Time spent planning, unless they can see a distinct value from that effort, they probably want you to spend it as little time as possible. So that could be something that we highlight and maybe we look at in more detail. But the one thing that stands out in this example is this environment setup. And this could be standing up a test environment. It could be setting up a local environment. It could be accessing an environment, or just refreshing it, right? It could be any number of activities. I agree. Planning is the most important part, and it should take a appropriate amount of time. It doesn't have to take a long time, doesn't have to be quick, but it needs to be effective. And so in a lot of teams, I find that planning takes a long time and it's not necessarily effective. So I end up looking at planning almost in every value stream that I look at. We highlight planning as an issue. But in this case, for illustrative purposes, we're looking at environment setup. And the reason why this stands out is because we've got 3 days of delay before it even starts. It takes a week, which is a week that your customers really don't care about, right? They don't even know that you're doing that, but they definitely don't want to pay you for it. And then 2 days afterwards, it waits before anybody even tests the outcome of that activity. So this is a notable issue in the value stream. And we would call this a constraint, right? This is where everything slows down. This is where, there's a significant impact to the velocity across the value stream, the flow of the work across the value stream. In a more detailed real life example, this is an illustration of that case where we have planning as a significant portion of the value stream. And you'll notice that this is actually not a lot of time. spent in planning. There's no delay to this either. But the reason why it was highlighted was because the team felt that they were getting very little value out of planning. So they were looking at the value stream in the context of value. And so the hotspots reflect that focus, right? So we set the goal, and the value stream measurement and what we call out is a function of what the goal was, which was in this case was get more value out of the activities that we're performing. So you'll notice again here, so there's a couple new things. There's who's involved in the value stream is represented here with those little dots that represent the separate roles. You also have these rework arcs where issues are detected and the work gets sent back. And that's something that is often really valuable to measure because it usually isn't tracked anywhere. The fact that we did something 4 times because we didn't get it right the first time. And that's, if you're talking about the flow all the way through the value stream and you loop back in these separate sections, then you're interrupting the flow, but it's very costly from a morale perspective, right? Nobody wants to be finding out that what they did was not correct and they have to redo it, because usually from their perspective, they were missing some information, something that they couldn't have done better because something was missing. So it's really valuable, I find, to highlight areas where we're kicking things back, where we're actually doing rework, because we incur the time penalty every single time. Sometimes it's really easy to just do a quick fix, but the disruption is still there. Usually people have moved on to the next task and you're interrupting the flow of that work because something's come back, and there's a lot of context switching penalty to that. It's pretty disruptive. So the other thing you'll notice here is in the bottom right corner, we're measuring some of the basics, but we're representing how long the total process takes, the step time, so just the time that's spent performing each activity, and then we're also representing the wait time as a separate metric, so that we can see what the distribution is. Oftentimes, the ratio is more wait time than step time. We spend more time waiting than we actually do doing the work, and that's pretty valuable to highlight when you can do it. So I've been throwing around a bunch of terms, and I wanted to clarify them for folks just in case these are new to you. But these are a couple of core words and terms that really matter to value stream mapping and value stream management, and this idea of looking at your work in terms of a flow. So lead time is this total time between the start and the end of a value stream. And some folks cut this short just because it's very difficult to measure from the very beginning of an idea all the way to a customer using the outcome of that idea. But that is the true lead time. And if you don't measure the true lead time, if you don't measure the true end-to-end time, you really don't know what it takes to deliver value to your customers. You don't know what it costs. You don't know how much time it takes. You don't know what to tell your customers when they ask you for something. And you won't know whether you're getting better at doing that unless you measure the true lead time. So a lot of folks will truncate this and they'll look at just the sprint as a value stream and calculate the start of the sprint to the end of the sprint. That doesn't necessarily mean that anything of value was delivered to customers. It should, because you should be delivering value in every sprint, but it often doesn't. So it's very important to look at the true lead time, because it really is the only representation of idea to realization and or quote to cash, or however you want to term that full end-to-end cycle, because that's what matters to the business. What matters to the business and what matters to customers is how quickly can you deliver something when I ask for it. As long as it's something that is valuable and you decide to do it, how quickly can you do that? And how quickly can you sustainably do that? Because you don't just do it once. It's so important because you do it constantly and it needs to happen constantly. So lead time is the most important thing. It's probably the most important metric in a business in terms of operations and the true function of the business. Next is the cycle time, which I talked about a couple times. That's that timing. It's almost like mini lead time. And it's the time that takes from the start of an activity to the end of an activity. And then last, this is a quality measure, which I think is really important. And it's pretty standard in the value stream maps that I create with folks, is looking at the percentage of the work that's completed that we deem to be complete and accurate, meaning each activity is some percentage of complete and accurate by the time it's done. You know, sometimes it's incomplete and it goes to the next stage and then it gets sent back because it wasn't done properly or it was missing something. And so understanding the first step of complete and accurate is understanding what complete and accurate is, which is actually pretty rare. But once you know what good looks like, once you know what each stage is supposed to deliver, you can measure what percentage of time you actually deliver that. And that's really important for highlighting quality issues and where quality breaks down in a value stream, because across the value stream, quality only goes down. You can't actually recover missing information and fix a gap if you've been given incorrect information or the work that's been handed to you is in a form that you're not able to fix. And that usually happens because each of these functions in the value stream is highly specialized. You can't just do someone else's job. You have to rely on them to do their job. And then once it's sent to you, you've got to focus on doing your part. So it's very rare for quality to be improved throughout the value stream. So what happens is you get a rolling complete and accurate. You actually get a calculation of declining quality as you progress through the value stream. And then what you get on the other end, the rolled percent complete and accurate, which is the total sum of all the quality metrics, is a very low number. It's usually something like 1%. And what that means is that there's 1% of the time something perfect to our specifications goes through the value stream. It's usually under 5% in most teams that I talk to. In even high performing teams, it's probably something like 15%, because it's very difficult to say what complete and accurate looks like in knowledge work, right? Knowledge work is creative. It's very difficult to do something to specification, because we're building new things all the time. And what is the specification for something we've never done before or never built before? That's difficult. We discover things as we go. So that it's fine to have a low number. We want to make sure that we can improve that number over time. So David's asking, is the value stream you're presenting a manual stream or automated? Do you mean the illustration previously?
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is manual coding, manual testing versus DevOps.
Oh, I see. There's usually a mix. I would say that in a lot of cases, there's quite a bit of manual work and quite a bit of automation. There's a lot of folks now who have pretty sophisticated CI/CD pipelines, infrastructure as code, even test-driven development, but there's still quite a bit of manual work. So I often see a big mix. And what's really common is for folks to come to me because they're not sure what to automate next. And they haven't necessarily seen performance improvements from the automation that they do have. A lot of times when you automate things, the automation adds its own complexity. Sometimes it adds its own delay, and sometimes it's actually slowing things down for a while. And it's difficult to understand when the automation is going to pay off. But to answer your question specifically, it's a mix.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's often a mix. So what we want to do with this effort is to really, again, improve the flow of work through the system. And the challenges involved in that are pretty common. And there's a lot of them, right? When we look at our average workflow, there's a lot of things that affect the performance, the ease, the sense of progress, the productivity of that flow, and there's a lot that can get in the way. So value stream mapping helps us sort of understand these things, these sort of abstract things, these outcomes and these negative effects in terms of what's actually happening before these things happen, or things that could prevent these incidental issues from happening by implementing a solution as a system that delivers work. So what we find is that there's a lot of unnecessary steps in a lot of value streams. There's opportunities to automate handoffs. So it's pretty common for folks to have some part of their value stream where someone has to email somebody else, or they put a ticket in a queue and it kind of sits. So eliminating manual handoffs or delays or phases where there has to be a meeting for things to move forward are pretty low-hanging opportunities to tackle. You also will have a lot of meetings that don't necessarily add value, right? And it's difficult to understand what value we're getting from meetings and whether we could get that value more effectively. And that doesn't necessarily mean faster, but maybe, we get more detail out of the meetings that we do have. And so oftentimes what we'll find in value streams is that there's a lot of time eaten up with arbitrary meetings that don't necessarily deliver value. They did at some point, we do the meeting every 3 weeks. But at this point in the team, we're pretty good at sorting out what we need to sort out in the meeting. Maybe we can get that information or move that thing forward a different way. Also, a lot of things will happen sequentially and they don't necessarily have to. There's sometimes lots of opportunities to run things in parallel if you just have the ability to get information to the people who need to do the work in a timely manner. And there's a lot of friction. There's a lot of things that people do manually or repeatedly without automating or creating things that will make it easier to get that work done. So it's another thing that we kind of find by looking at value streams. And oftentimes when you map the value stream, you find a lot of waste that can be eliminated right away. So this is kind of a rule of thumb of value stream mapping, and it's been true with everyone that I talk to who does it. Everybody says there's something between 20 and 30% of a value stream that can just go away the moment you map it, because that's the moment that you see what's happening and you're able to have a really high quality conversation about what you should do about that. So in every single case that I've ever worked with a value stream, there's been 20% of the value stream that can just go away. Sometimes it's 80%. Sometimes there's one gigantic delay that is because somebody sends some email to another team and there's an approval process that takes forever. And all they needed to do was just say that, I've done X, Y, and Z, and this is the specification for X, Y, and Z. So if I say that I've done it, it's fine. And they always approve it unless it's a very specific case, an outlier case that means that there needs to be a real review. That's pretty common. It's pretty common to see work go to someone in the organization who just rubber stamps everything because 99% of the time it's fine. And if the people sending the work just knew what the 1% looked like or had some clear criteria, they could eliminate that entire step. So that's the sort of thing that we discover. But then once you start discovering this waste inside of the value stream, it can pay you back in terms of so much time and energy that not only can you make time to address more complicated improvements, right? If you need time, everybody needs time to automate things. Everybody needs time to spend on innovation, or more time building product and less time fighting bugs. Or maybe they need to get rid of all the bugs in a backlog. You get that time by eliminating waste, and then you can invest that time in things that eliminate more of the lead time, more of the time that's spent. And this is kind of like a virtuous cycle, right? If you reinvest your time, you can start really making dramatic changes in your value stream. The other thing I like to point out is that just mapping, along with that 20% that you get right away, you get a couple of really positive effects from a cultural perspective. So you're bringing people together who don't usually work together, and you don't usually have conversations about how you do the work. So it can be really valuable to bring everybody together and focus on looking at the flow of work, because not only does it provide this diversity of perspectives that you don't have access to on a regular basis, it's pretty cathartic to think about, this is work that we're probably not super happy to be doing all the time. There's one piece of the work that we really love, and that's what keeps us going. And then all the rest of it is just stuff that we have to put up with because that's the way we do things. So I'm gonna address this. I got a great question in the chat, and I'll read it out to everyone and then answer it. So it's interesting that you went to waste elimination first. There's the lean decision filter, which paraphrase says a focus on value trumps a focus on flow, which trumps a focus on waste elimination. How does this fit into value stream mapping? Focusing efforts and thinking about focusing on value and the flow of value ahead of efficiency. So this is really important. And I think that is correct. I also think that it's not necessarily super accessible to people, which is why I get them to focus on waste first. The reason I focus on waste is that usually people are kind of intrinsically motivated to address waste just because it's painful, right? It's usually holding us back from things that we want to do. And thinking about value is pretty difficult for most people. I think a lot of people associate value with how much something costs, how much effort is put into it, how much the customer pays for it. And it can be difficult to think of value in terms of leading indicators rather than lagging indicators. What I mean by that is, like, what is something of value that is going to be realized in the future, right? What's the value of waiting to eat the marshmallow versus eating the marshmallow right away? That's something that is not so easy for folks, which is why I tend to start with waste. But you're right. Value really dictates what's even worth doing, which makes it really important. If you really focus on value, you might actually realize that everything that you're doing is wrong, which would be fantastic, right? I mean, we kind of get a feeling in the pit of our stomach when we think about that, but doing things wrong is actually way worse. It's just less of a shock to the system, I would say. But understanding value and focusing on value is really how you get to doing the right thing, which eliminates waste sort of automatically. But at the same time, so that being said, flow is also extremely important. So the speed at which you can do things is extremely important, because the faster you can deliver, the faster you can learn. And the faster you can learn, the faster you can actually discover value, right? We might have an idea of what's valuable, especially if we're building something that someone hasn't actually paid for yet. We have an idea, we have expected value. you don't actually know that that's valuable until it's delivered, which means the flow is important, velocity is important, and your speed of learning is important. And this is kind of like an iron triangle, I would say, right? It's very difficult to say which of these is more important and where to start. But I would say start where you have an opportunity, right? If people complain a lot about how long things take, or that, they just don't see why this process is necessary, then waste, I think, is a very powerful focal point, and it can be very catalyzing, right? If you have people complaining that it takes too long, and let's say they're outside the value stream, then flow could be very important to demonstrate we are doing things, we are actually shipping things, we are making progress, right? Sometimes people want progress. Sometimes you don't know what's valuable and you need to show that you're experimenting and discovering, right? So that could be really important. But ultimately, value trumps everything. Yeah, you're right, Jim. That's a great way to put it. Waste can be an extremely quick win. Getting rid of something and or just deciding not to do something is incredibly effective and efficient. It's very quick, and it can really build some momentum, right? You can show that you've accomplished something by just not doing something the next day. And I often find that's where you get that 20% from. You really can't get that 20% right away by focusing on improving value. It's difficult to improve value. It takes time. It's also difficult to improve flow because you've got to go all the way through the lead time, the entire value stream before you've really realized the benefits of that. But eliminating waste happens almost eliminate. But you're right, again, that a lot of folks will just get rid of waste or focus too much on eliminating waste. And then they start getting really aggressive with what they think is wasteful. And that can just be a race to the bottom, right? It's much better it's another reason why value is so important. Waste doesn't matter nearly as much if you're generating a ton of value. There's a lot of organizations where they generate so much value that the waste is an afterthought. And that's a negative consequence for a lot of people, and probably a negative consequence for humanity. But it can really hide a lot of challenges when you're able to generate a ton of value. Go ahead, Jim, and I'm going to take a look at this other piece of what you mentioned, Damon. Thanks.
Yeah, the thing that I'm looking at is if you go ahead and identify waste, okay, that is a quick win. So what you're doing is you're presenting, okay, the value that's coming out of the value mapping, and the fact that you're identifying waste, and the fact that, okay, you've done that. Obviously, there's more that you can do because you've already delivered on something. And so you could go ahead and kind of treat it as a series of wins that keeps moving forward.
That's an excellent point. And I think it's very important to think of an exercise like value stream mapping in that context, because you're pulling people away from their work. That's very uncomfortable, right? You're pulling people away from their work to scrutinize how the work is being done. That's another uncomfortable thing that people aren't used to. And what you're going to discover is a bunch of waste. That's the third thing that's uncomfortable, right? You have to be in a culture that's truly actually dedicated to improvement. They have to walk the talk. But if you're in an organization that actually cares about improvement, this is the best way I've ever found to driving it. It's extremely powerful. But you're right, even when people see the value of the exercise and they're willing to take the time, you have to kind of reward that risk taking and that investment of time with as many results and positive outcomes as possible as early as possible. So you have to point out that it's extremely valuable that they even took the time, just the gesture of stepping away from their work to consider how they work is something to be celebrated. It's incredibly rare for us to stop what we're doing and think about how well we're doing it and what we're actually doing. So you start with that celebration, and then you carry that through by saying, let's look at the positive results of all of these efforts. And then you almost build a flywheel saying, eliminating the waste is going to give us time to build the automation. It's going to give us time to be more creative, which is going to give us the ability to be more connected to our customers, which is going to give us better feedback, which is going to allow us to deliver more value. And you can fuel all of that with expected value, but you only get realized value when you've actually delivered something to a customer. And that takes time, and that takes a very concerted effort. This is really great discussion. I really appreciate the questions and the framing here. So aside from bringing the team together and sparking some really powerful and unique conversations, we're also refocusing everybody. It's an opportunity to think about our work in the context of a target outcome. So why we're doing what we're doing. We're doing what we're doing for customers, right? We're doing what we're doing collaboratively. We're working together. We have people upstream of us who give us work, and we give work to people who are downstream of us, and we're all connected in this flow. But also we have this common goal of why we're doing the mapping. We're taking action to improve quality or improve value or eliminate waste, to be more effective, maybe to enjoy our work more, or maybe just be, more connected as a team and understand, where we should be focusing our efforts. There's all kinds of ways you can connect this to higher level goals and outcomes. So thinking about flow is extremely valuable. Just understanding that work needs to flow through the organization and out to customers. And looking at the entire end-to-end picture is, again, incredibly important. We get the opportunity to bring separate perspectives into alignment. And one thing that's always stuck with me was one of my first value stream mapping exercises. We had a bunch of people in the room, and we were doing introductions, and the third person to introduce herself said, "This is the first time I've actually ever met with these people. Like, I didn't actually," and they'd been at the company for years. And so this was the first opportunity to really see who was around them, who they relied on and who relied on them as part of this chain of delivering value. But another one that sticks out is someone who's at a company for 19 years. And after mapping a value stream, he said, "I've been here for 19 years, and this is the first time I've ever seen our process from start to finish." And I think that's really powerful. So we get this opportunity to bring these different perspectives together to have extremely powerful conversations about what really matters inside the company to the people who are doing the work, and how all that value gets delivered, how the business succeeds. And it's an incredibly powerful way to identify opportunities. So to review the start to finish, I just want to go through each step in the process very clearly, and this will be a wrap up. This is just a way to sort of cap this off. But first, we want to identify our value stream. We want to understand who can support the effort of mapping the value stream and then executing on whatever insights we discover. You want to identify the participants of the mapping exercise. You want to understand how you're going to come together. So whether that's in a physical space or on Zoom, and what you're going to use to map the value stream. You're going to understand what the scope is. So you can be measuring at any level of the organization. You can measure, if you're If you're Heinz ketchup, you can measure anything from tomatoes to a hamburger, or you can measure how you design a new label for the bottle, right? It's really up to you, and where you draw those boundaries depends on understanding the value that you're trying to get out of the exercise, right? That's gonna help you define where you set those boundaries and what level you're looking at, what level of detail and granularity. So then you identify the steps in the process, each distinct activity. You're going to identify that touch time and wait time, so the time that people are actually doing work or waiting for things to happen. Then you're going to sum all that up. You're going to collect all the data and represent the data in its total form, so you understand the end-to-end impact of everything that's going on. You want to look at which steps are actually providing value and the time that's spent actually providing value. And then what you want to do is understand things like who's involved in the value stream, because you want to understand who to go to. If you identify an opportunity, you want to make sure that you know who to go to and involve them in improving the value stream instead of pointing fingers. You want to understand who can own an improvement effort, who knows the most about what's happening. And sometimes that person is not necessarily in the room, or the representative in the room knows enough to map the value stream, but they're not actually going to be the one executing on the improvement opportunity. So that's an important distinction. So as I mentioned, you could be measuring any number of dimensions here. You can be representing all kinds of things. Sometimes I'll put tools and artifacts in a value stream map. Sometimes when we're in a highly technical environment, we'll do that, and we'll understand, because we have a lot of folks come to me because they have tons of tools and none of it seems to be helping, and everything just gets more complex all the time. So we'll look at where are the tools, how are the tools being leveraged, and how can we consolidate or leverage tools in a different way? Maybe what tools can we integrate? How can we automate a handoff across the value stream so that people don't have to be doing the manual work that could be done by machines? So with that, I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. I appreciate your patience. This is a fairly long talk. I'm glad it got broken up by a couple of questions, but if you've got any questions, feel free to jump off of mute and let me know. Or if you've got a problem, if you've got a situation at work, maybe you've tried value stream mapping before and it didn't help. I'd love to hear about that. I'd love to talk about anything around value streams. I'm fairly obsessed.
Hey, Steve, can you go back to your stream that you had before, the diagram?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. This one?
Yeah, close enough. We can go for one more. It's a little bit simpler.
This one?
Go for that one.
Yeah, the simple.
Yeah, so you mentioned parallelization. Parallelization, that's a hard word to say, which I fully understand, but I'm just wondering if you can give us an example in this of where you would parallelize activities.
Yeah, this is great. This is a great example of, let's say, an oversimplified value stream. So parallelization would be difficult, but let's say we add something in here that we could parallelize. So let's say we had a build stage. So we do a environment setup, and we're setting the stage for deploying an artifact, but we build that artifact before we set up the environment. And then we set the environment up, and then we deploy the artifact to the environment. You could probably build the artifact and set up the environment at the same time. And then once the artifact is deployed, as long as the environment is ready, you can deploy the artifact. So that's a pretty simple one. A more dramatic example would be building the artifact once, and a lot of organizations, they'll build an artifact for testing, then they'll rebuild the artifact before they go to production. It's actually a security risk to do that, and it's not a great practice, but it also wastes time, and it introduces a lot of opportunity for failure. So building once, and I would say building in parallel whenever you can. If you're building multiple things and they don't depend on each other, you can do those things in parallel. So that would be a pretty simplified example if it's helpful.
Yes, straightforward example. There's a lot of things here that I see that can be parallelized. Which I generally do, but I just wanted to get clarification from you. So thank you.
Which pieces do you commonly parallelize?
Well, it's parallelize, not paralyze. That might be waste. That'd be cost of delay.
Yeah, we don't want to paralyze the value stream. We definitely want to parallelize.
So, well, first thing, look at the product and then invert it. So you want to find a team, right? And then go through that process. Let's just take a story, and these are all the steps that go through the story. So plan, develop, tests, most of that can actually be done in parallel. The hardest thing to explain is how you test and develop together. And this is with QA and with a couple of developers. But I found that has sped up this process quite a lot. The environment, obviously, that's a hard one if you have to reach out to another team. Same with deployment. And maximizing, you can maximize against the plan as well by planning and building at the same time. So there's areas in there that you can scrunch things up. Not all the time, but
right,
as you're probably well aware.
That's a great point. And it is true that, I would argue that we need to test throughout the entire value stream. You need to plan throughout the entire value stream. You need to be developing throughout the entire value stream. Like, there's a lot of these activities. They do to some extent depend on a prior stage, but there is an aspect of that distinct activity present throughout. I should be more, so this is extremely simplified for illustration purposes, but if I was talking about testing that kind of has to happen later in the process, I would say that integration testing is an example of something that's very difficult to do in parallel early on in the value stream. But we can test even the request itself. And I like to see groups test even requests. So meaning when someone comes to the company and says, I would like X, the first test is, well, okay, would you like X more than Y? Because we're already building Y. Or we have two options. We could build Y or Z. Or we could build what you've asked for or this other feature. And sometimes folks are really happy with the thing that you're already building or the thing that you already plan to build, and they'll go away and let you do the thing that you're already doing. And so that easy test of, should we even be building this thing is often where I like to start. Sometimes it's, someone's asked us to do something, but we look at the roadmap and we make sure, is this in service of the roadmap? This is going to get us to where we hope to get sooner or later. Is this a better thing to deliver because maybe it's associated with a huge paycheck, a huge enterprise deal? And so it actually, we do really need to build it, but we actually need to build it way ahead of a bunch of other stuff. So we want to start work on it tomorrow. So that initial test, you can be testing at each of these stages to some degree. And, having a distinct activity at a single stage is very much a waterfall thing that I think is going away wherever we can get rid of it.
We're trying.
We are trying. I mean, it is very difficult.
Actually, what you just said was kind of interesting. What I try to look for, what many people, Agilists, try to look for, is getting value out the door quickly. Now, you just said something that may make a lot of money, but we plan it out a long way ahead, or I may have heard that wrong. But that to me would be antithetical to getting value out the door. Meaning that the customer isn't getting, that juicy bit of the pie that they want to immediately use. They have to wait until you get this feature out. And did I hear that right, or did I completely miss that?
I didn't, that is not what I said, but I'm not sure exactly how I phrased what I said. But essentially, the gist would be that testing an initial customer request allows for immediate feedback and validation that, first of all, that the thing really lines up with what is most valuable to deliver at the time. And I think that a lot of us will take requests and file them into a backlog. And then we sort of come back to them when we have time to come back to them, which is often long past when the customer requested it. And oftentimes that means that it either just goes away because it's no longer relevant, or we forget why it was even there. And we feel pretty sheepish about going back to the customer and asking them for clarification. So having a sort of triage and this validation early on allows you to not only get higher quality information, but a lot of validation that's really can save you from building the wrong thing way down the road. Also, one thing that I've successfully put into practice many times is asking customers, like, how much, like, what is this worth to you, right? Like, how much would you pay for this? And you asked us for this thing a month ago. We're halfway through building it. Would you rather we just did this thing instead? Usually the answer is not, throw away the thing that's almost done and do this right away. But that conversation and starting that customer feedback early on and getting that validation really optimizes your odds, or improves your odds of delivering value down the road.
Looks like you have a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah, we got one about how to start touch time and wait time. Usually team is pretty lazy to manually Jira status every time they touch and wait. Yes, absolutely. So this is a real life challenge that I'm actually in the middle of with several teams all the time. And you can't automatically capture, and this is a reason why we still do value stream mapping, even though we have tools for everything. The data that you get is only as valuable as the data that's going into the system. And in Jira or whatever task management system, when people are capturing their work and illustrating, that something's in progress, or they pulled it off a backlog, oftentimes, it'll stay open long past delivery. So your lead time calculation, if you're using Jira, is completely off. And it's really difficult to get granular data on how the work is flowing through the system. So the easy way to get around that is to figure out a comfortable granularity so that you're not introducing unnecessary burden on the people who need to log the activity. Usually what happens is, I find it's pretty easy to use Kanban for that, to use a Kanban board with pretty distinct lanes for denoting progress and where things are. So you have distinct wait states represented in your Kanban board. And then as things move across, how long it's spent in each of those areas. But that can get very granular if you have a stage for every stage of the value stream and a wait state for every stage of the value stream. It's accurate, but it can be burdensome. So it can be helpful to automate some of that with some code. So things that move stages based on activities and events, such as when somebody closes a code review and merges some code, Jira moves a ticket across the Kanban board. Sometimes you can have things triggered where if it stays in a certain state past an acceptable threshold, a message is sent to Slack and someone either just says, yeah, it's still waiting, or I'm still working on it. Or, they can easily just press a button or type a single letter and it will move it automatically, right? So there's a lot of, and I would say that those are fairly trivial automations to do, but they can give you a lot of information accuracy by making it easy for people to kind of report what's actually happening. And I would say, it's not, you don't want to set up a police state where you know what everyone's doing all the time, but you do need to measure. So using a value stream management tool can be valuable for that. Setting up your workflow so that it's easy to instrument can be valuable for that. Adding in simple automations, but also just doing mapping. Like if it's going to take, if you've already done a value stream mapping exercise and it's 3 months later and you want to understand how things are going, in 2 hours, you could have an updated value stream map that reflects all of this measurement, and that can help you make some good decisions. Cully says, what about, I hope that answered your question, Andre. Let me know if it doesn't, if you've got a follow-up, toss it in the chat. Cully says, what about using TDD? I'm not sure what the context of the question is specifically, but of course, if it's in the context of what David and I were discussing earlier, that TDD would be involved from very early stages, right? You probably want to be testing prior to and during development in that case. But when I say test in the context of this example, what I really mean is integration testing, or a necessary stage, a necessary distinct stage. I think test-driven development is fantastic, and I highly recommend it. I actually think test-driven everything is fantastic.
How about BDD, behavior-driven?
Yeah, I mean, that can get a little bit more complicated, but I think, anytime we have something motivating what we're doing, anytime where our actions are driven by something rational and somewhat systematic, I think we'll probably realize some benefits. Damon, I saw was that a thumbs up or a question? I'm not sure.
Who, from me?
No, I saw it was Damon popped up, but then he might have raised his hand and lowered it, but
it was a false alarm.
Oh yeah. Okay.
You said test driven anything is good, and I went for the clap and ended up with the raised hand by accident.
Oh, got it. Awesome.
Great.
I think we might be at time.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, are there any more questions?
Yeah, one more. Why not throw one in there? So cost of delay, is every step that you don't do, the cycle time. How do you record that? Do you sort of use just a general kind of dollar number, or what do you do to share with your your parties, your customers, etc. As a metric?
Delay, I think, is it's the holy grail, right? It's very difficult to calculate. I think there's a lot of factors that are involved in cost of delay. I would recommend to anybody who hasn't read The Principles of Product Development Flow by Donald Reinertson. It's an incredible book that everybody should probably read, that goes into cost of delay to a much greater extent than I could. But I think, there's a lot of factors to consider when you're considering cost, and there's more factors that are involved when you're trying to calculate what delay means. Is delay purchase, or is delay engagement? Is delay a positive referral, or is it a testimonial? Is it feedback? So understanding, the boundaries of the value stream that you intend to measure, understanding the cost of all the effort involved in the value stream, I think is incredibly important. But then, I would say it's a highly evolved level of maturity and capability to be able to accurately measure cost of delay. And I don't know I actually don't know of anyone who does it consistently, but I do think that we're moving in that direction. I think what's happening with value stream management software is we are starting to have systems that are capable of considering the high number of factors that go into something like a cost of delay measure. And I think we'll start to see it be at least represented to a degree in an automated way, and that can help us kind of inform decisions. Like one of the things I'm really excited about in value stream management is being able to simulate all this and say, what would happen if we were to automate this and it reduced the cycle time here by 30%, but also, by automating it and sharing it across all the product teams, we're actually, having a noticeable impact on our total cost of goods sold. And being able to measure that across all the dimensions that are affected when you do make an investment is, I think, pretty complicated, but ultimately I'm seeing tech and business converging in more and more places, and things like calculating costs more accurately and being able to predict and forecast based on the data that we collect in the flow is going to be, I think, a huge revelation and a huge eye-opener for how much waste is actually happening in your average product development flow.
Sure, a lot of companies are doing that, especially the big ones.
You mean calculating cost of delay?
Yeah. I guarantee you, like Amazon has to. There's no way they're not doing that.
Amazon's doing all the things that everybody should be doing.
Everything we need to do.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, when you say large organizations, I think of a bank, and I think of they're far from calculating cost of delay.
Some of them are. Some of them are ahead of the game. But generally they're kind of slower. The more traditional businesses are generally slower. They'll get there eventually.
Indeed, whether they like it or not.
All right. Are there any more questions?
What was the name of the book?
Which book?
Oh, you mentioned the book about the cost of delay.
Oh, yeah, it's called The Principles of Product Development Flow.
Principle of Product Development Flow. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it's about 162 principles. It's really an amazing book. It seems like a lot, but some of them are pretty short, and it's a great book because it breaks down a lot of complex thinking and learning and ideas into pretty manageable bites of information.